Hi, thanks for coming back for Chapter 8 of True Colors. In the last episode, we finally found out what was the significance of that book that Sergeant Levitt gave to Cassie, and now she has handed it over to Major Byron, who works for the intelligence arm of the War Department. And we also found out why Major Byron has been resistant to pursuing Cassie despite his interest in her. And it's understandable, but he did have to renege on that promise to himself. So in this episode, their courtship begins, and he takes her to a spectacular place that calms her soul. I've been to this place, and I have some photographs that I'm going to show at the end of the episode, so I hope you'll stay tuned throughout the whole video and see some of those photographs of what the place looks like now. But for right now, let's get back in and see how this courtship develops.
True Colors, Chapter 8. Major Byron surely noticed my somber mood when he called for me on Sunday morning, but he asked no questions. He got much more out of the service at the Presbyterian Church than I did, and spent nearly a half hour afterwards discussing theological topics with two of the elders. I spoke with some of my women friends who were happy to see that I had not come unescorted at this time. He drove the buggy along Washington Street, heading away from the waterfront. "I thought we'd spend the day in Washington if it's all right with you. We could take in some sights and later dine at a favorite restaurant of mine near the Capitol." "That sounds fine." A little way from town he pulled the horse to a stop on a grassy knoll near the huge oak. "Cassie, may I call you Cassie? You already did once. I wish you would continue." "Cassie, something is obviously troubling you. I won't pry. I just want you to be honest with me and tell me if you'd rather I take you home. We could do this another day. That is, I'd like to." I dropped my gaze to the folded hands on my lap. "I'm rather poor company today, aren't I?" "Your company is always pleasurable to me. I'm just sorry to see you so discontented." I covered my eyes with my hand, trying to block out the awful memory. "I had a dream last night. Not like a nightmare, not the kind where you wake up frightened but can calm yourself by saying it wasn't real and it's over. That's what scares me the most, that this one was just the beginning." He turned in his seat to face me. "I'm afraid I don't understand. This wasn't some twisted fantasy that crept from my imagination as I slept. This was real. There were images of things I've witnessed but had forced out of my mind. I didn't know how to explain, but the need to be released from this prison of memories was the more powerful force. His respectful silence allowed me to continue. "Several weeks ago, there were 12 amputations performed in a single day. When I went out behind the hospital at dusk to dump the trash, I nearly tripped over a pile of limbs that had been thrown there. Arms, legs, just put out with the trash. As I stood staring down in horror, an arm, all discolored and mottled, was dislodged from the top of the pile and slid down to my feet. The hand came to rest as if gripping my ankle." The officer's hand moved to my shoulder. "Cassie, you don't have to." I couldn't move. The stench was as overwhelming as the horrid sight, but I couldn't move. Finally, I felt myself being ripped away from there as if by an outside force. When I re-entered the hospital, I told myself I had to forget what I saw. If I kept such memories, I could never continue as a nurse. So I hid it away every time it crept back, treating it as if it was the dream. But last night I saw it all again. This time, several hands grabbed my leg, and I fell over trying to get away. I crawled into the hospital, got up and ran into the ward, but there was blood everywhere. I could hear the men calling for me, but I couldn't get to them without fording through streams of blood. It was everywhere. I began to shake all over. Am I going insane? No, he whispered as he stroked my hair. I don't know if I can remain here. I'm afraid the dreams will come back. There's no guarantee they'll stop if you leave. You've been through the thick of it, Cassie, and your memories are a part of you now. But don't let your fears determine your future. You must decide what you're going to do in spite of them, not because of them. I gazed beyond him to a footpath where two lovers were walking at leisure, hand in hand. The girl looked to be in such peace, without a care, enjoying the Sunday sun. I envied her serenity. His opinion somehow mattered to me, and I ventured to ask, "What do you think I should do?" He took a slow breath. "I have to admit that sometimes I question whether a hospital full of afflicted, barely clothed men with ghastly wounds is any place for a woman. Yet I've seen you work. If the fate of those men should ever befall me, I know I'd want you there. And I'd miss you if you left now. But it's not about the patients or me. You are worthy of whatever will bring you satisfaction and serenity. What's best for you is what matters." How far removed from Cal's declaration of, "You are of no earthly use." I doubt you realize the worth of your words, Major. If I've helped, I'm glad. But would you please stop calling me Major? My name is Michael. I know, like the Archangel. He laughed, and I found it contagious. Only a short time ago, the concept of laughter was far from me. Now it was as close as Michael. "Cassie, do you have a horse?" "Not here in Alexandria." "But you do ride?" "Of course." "Then let's forget about seeing Washington today. Change into some riding clothes. We'll go get my horse and rent you one, and then I'll take you to a place I guarantee will improve your outlook on things." I sighed in skepticism. That's quite a guarantee. This is quite a place. We cantered through the most spectacular scenery I had seen since leaving Pennsylvania. We rode for 10 miles to the west and slightly north through woods dense with autumn foliage. The November sun was bright in a cloudless sky, the air cool and crisp. Sometimes we slowed our pace to better take in the dazzling reds and fiery oranges and sparkling yellows of the breathtaking panorama. Their brilliance was jarring, and I could not help but concede to Michael that these surroundings, the radiant colors, the earthy smell of fallen leaves all around us, the solitude of this imposing vista, was truly a salve to my wounded soul. I first came here last summer, and the place keeps drawing me back. I've never seen it this beautiful, though. But what I want to show you is still up ahead. This isn't the place you spoke of? This is only the gateway to it. Stop here a minute and listen. In the stillness, I heard birds chirping. Leaves rustled in the gentle breeze before beginning their silent journey to the earth below. Some that had already fallen crinkled beneath the tiny feet of squirrels and other creatures busily storing food for the winter. Listen closer. My ears strained to hear beyond the immediate sounds around me. My senses finally came alert to a faint rumbling. Is there a waterfall nearby? He chuckled. You could call it that. The low hum of rushing water grew into a thunderous roar as we approached the great falls of the Potomac River. We emerged from the woods, and the intense sight and sound of the torrential currents before us spooked my horse as well as myself. It took several seconds for me to regain control of the handsome dapple-gray mare. I then turned my attention to one of the most breathtaking scenes of nature I had ever witnessed. The sound, the vibration from the cascading rapids penetrated deep into my bones. From our vantage point, I judged the river to be about 1,000 feet across, the water rushing past us at enormous speed and stair-stepping its way downstream. My heart pulsated in symphony with the surging water as it pounded over and around the rocky barriers in its path. I've never seen anything in nature so dramatic as this, I exclaimed above the resounding noise of the falls. The gray was still jittery beneath me. Michael said, I think she's afraid you're going to ask her to cross it. Not likely. Riding east along the Virginia side of the falls, Michael explained that the river dropped nearly 80 feet in 3/4 of a mile. There was once a canal built by the Potomac Company, whose president was George Washington, that bypassed the falls and was considered one of the greatest engineering feats in the world at the time. We rode past the skeletal remains of an old gristmill and ironworks company. Further downstream was what remained of the tiny town of Matildaville, where we dismounted. Matildaville, I mused aloud. It had to have been named by some thoughtful man in dedication to his beloved wife. That's exactly right. It was named for the recently deceased wife of the man who planned the town. How tragically romantic. Do you know who he was? Someone you may remember from your history lessons, Henry or Light Horse Harry Lee. That takes me back a ways, to around 6th grade, but I believe he fought in the Revolution. And wasn't it him who delivered President Washington's eulogy, describing him as first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen? So you do know your history. And to think that I'm walking on the very ground where some famous historical figures walked. Anywhere your feet trod, you are walking in the footsteps of history, whether those of a famous person or the common man or woman who helped form this great land. That's why, soon after I move to a new place, I always research its past. I feel like I'm continuing in a history started long ago. I never thought of it quite like that, but I knew from then on I always would. And Henry Lee's legacy is continuing through his son. He's the father of Robert E. Lee. Who's he? A Confederate general. I've never heard of him. Not yet, maybe, but I have a wary apprehension that he'll someday be a man to reckon with. We mounted again, riding past the remains of the canal where a series of 5 locks had been built to circumvent the falls. Grass, weeds, and fallen leaves now covered the bottom of the locks that had once been filled, emptied, and refilled dozens of times a day while the canal was in operation. Now they were ghostly silent, having been abandoned more than 30 years earlier. We rode on to a large log house with a white fence around it. A sign next to the door read, "Dickey's Inn." Michael dismounted and assisted me down. You can't come to the falls without grabbing a bite at Dickey's. Dickey's Inn was reputed to have been visited by presidents, statesmen, and other famous people. A Union intelligence officer and a government nurse were among those less than famous guests now seated in the restaurant. A man wearing a gray shirt and pants under a white apron came to our table. "What'll it be, Major Byron?" Michael ordered for both of us, and before the waiter left the table, he said, "Be sure and tell the President hello for me, Major. We look forward to having him back." I looked across the table at Michael. "The President? The President of what?" "Well, I'm assuming he's referring to the President of the United States." My jaw fell. "You know President Lincoln?" He merely shrugged. "We're acquainted." I sank back into my chair. "How do you know him? Through your work with the Intelligence Bureau?" "Actually, it goes back farther than my brief military career, which only started this past summer. I had been working as a Pinkerton railroad detective when Alan Pinkerton himself recruited me to assist in transporting then President-elect Lincoln from Philadelphia to Washington by train. There had been many threats to assassinate him and solid plans for carrying out those threats." "You obviously protected him successfully." "It was quite a hair-raising trip, with Lincoln disguised as an ordinary traveler. We changed the route several times. We cut telegraph lines. In Baltimore, where we had to switch to another locomotive, the engine was supposed to take us to Washington, but it wasn't there. So we sat and waited, our eyes and ears alert for any unnatural sight and sound. And believe me, every motion and sound seemed unnatural. For an entire hour we were held there, tense, knowing that even some Maryland police were involved in seditionist activities. A man was propped on the platform singing Dixie about 100 times over, and we had to consider that he was a Confederate plant. Turned out he was just drunk. When we finally pulled into the Washington station, Mr. Lincoln stood up, and he's a giant of a man, several inches taller than me, stretched out his long limbs and said in that western drawl of his, "Well, boys, thank God this prayer meeting is over." I laughed at the president's remark and was duly impressed by my companion's own fascinating history. Sometime after that, Pinkerton asked me if I would be interested in helping to organize an espionage network. I was. Next thing I knew, I was mustered into the Army as a major assigned to the War Department. And here I am. And you still see the president? Nearly every day. He comes to the War Department for the latest news since we have a telegraph office. A few times he has even spent the night on Secretary Stanton's couch. On occasion, I'm called to the Executive Mansion for meetings, and a couple of times, when he came here to Dickey's to escape the pressure of his office and the harassment of the press, he invited me to be a member of his party. Where did he sit? Why, in the very spot you are. I was sure he was teasing, but it was enough to know that the man I had long admired for his strength of character, his convictions, his wisdom, and his humor, had eaten in this inn with the same officer who was now buying me dinner. As we ate a delicious meal, we exchanged childhood reminiscences. Michael grew up in a large family in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. His experiences tracking crafty animal prey in the wild proved to be a boon to his past profession as a detective capturing wily criminal prey, and his current one of calculating the intentions of enemy intelligence. The wilderness also instilled in him a love of nature he never outgrew. That's why I love this place so much. It's nature in its purest form. No man can ever conquer those falls. We have to go around them. He was concerned that I had no family closer than Pittsburgh, but I insisted I was used to faring for myself. Your cousin Eric, you say he was killed at Bull Run? Yes. He was with the 27th Pennsylvania. He's listed among the missing and presumed dead. Presumed dead? Then I clung to that hope at first. My cousin Greg was in training in Georgetown then, and after I came to Washington, we searched list after list of wounded and those taken prisoner. His name appeared on none of them. Then Greg found a soldier from Eric's regiment, which had retreated back to the city. He said he saw Eric go down from a bullet wound to the head. He had a hasty burial along with so many others who were never identified. I'm so sorry, Cassie. I was at least grateful that he and Greg hadn't been assigned together like they had planned. Things got fouled up and their names ended up on different rosters. They tried pleading, cajoling, even bribing, but to no avail. They had volunteered for the Pennsylvania Reserve Corps, and that's who Greg is with now. Infantry? No, the Signal Service. He's a flag flopper? I smiled. I've never heard it called that. They're among the bravest of the brave, I'll tell you. They're right there in front. He caught himself too late and tried to cover his revelation. What I mean... I know what you mean. He's out there in full view of the enemy, both arms busy with signal flags so he can't shoot back. I found all this out after he left. He always emphasized that since he would be considered a non-combatant, he would be in a safer position than Eric was. I know now he only told me that to ease my anxiety, but it wreaks havoc on my heartbeat every time I think about him. You're obviously very close to your cousins. Eric and Hannah and I grew up more like brothers and sisters. Greg, his sister Mandy, and later the twins Julie and Jeffrey would visit every summer, and often we would visit them in Pittsburgh. On the night before they left, Eric and Greg sat in front of my hearth and read from Thomas Paine's The American Crisis. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Michael's brow raised. I'm impressed. They charged me to memorize those words and keep them in my heart, and I have. I paused a moment to collect my faltering voice. Those 3 months after they left were the loneliest of my entire life. Alone on the farm for the first time, there was nothing but silence where there used to be comforting voices and a house full of laughter. When the news of Eric came, I leased out both farms and moved here. I smiled in remembrance of my half-Scandinavian hulk of a cousin. He had a laugh so hearty it seemed to come all the way from his toenails. He used to call me Sassy instead of Cassie. He said I was the sassiest girl he'd ever met or ever hoped to. Were you? I could be when the occasion called for it. Like when accosted by a drunken soldier on the street at night. By the way, you never did tell me whether you would have truly inflicted a mishap. My arm slid across the table and knocked a glass of water onto the Major's lap. Astonished, he looked across at me. What did you do that for? Because the occasion called for it. Will you be having dessert this afternoon, Major Byron? The waiter asked in a most timely fashion. Oh, I see you've spilled on yourself. I'll get you a towel. Michael stared at me through narrowed eyes, then burst into laughter. He wriggled in soggy trousers throughout our dessert of banana cream pie and still squirmed as we exited the inn. I hope they don't shrink. Just have Uncle Sam take the cost of a new pair out of my allowance. I'll hold you to that. We rode for half a mile alongside the falls before turning our horses into the woods to start for home. Halting just inside the trees, I turned and rode back to the edge of the great waters. The mist of the thrashing waters kissed my face in gentle contrast to the power of the cascading currents. I sat astride my nervous gray and looked on at the water for several minutes before returning to the trees where my companion waited. You were right, Michael. These falls are so dramatic and their sounds so thunderous, yet somehow their surges create in me a calmness, a stillness, amid the chaos I live with every day. Thou shalt forget thy misery and remember it as waters that pass away. The Book of Job. It certainly is true in this place. I have an idea of how Lewis and Clark must have felt when they came upon the great falls of the Missouri River. In his journal, Captain Lewis wrote that he wished he were a writer or poet so that he could do justice to the magnificence of the scene before him. He wondered how he'd be able to aptly describe to the world what had been concealed from them since the commencement of time. We looked on together in silence, neither wanting to say farewell to this friend whose force pulsed through us with great energy and somehow carried our worldly cares far from us, strengthening us within. I wonder if Mr. Lincoln feels this way about it. I believe he does. We turned our horses and walked through the forest of bright autumn hues. I would like to meet him some day. Mr. Lincoln? Not through me you won't meet him. And why not? I'd be afraid your sassy nature might surface and you could think the occasion called for pouring a glass of water onto his lap. I would never do that to him. You did it to me. Him I respect. His forehead crinkled. So that's the thanks I get for buying you dinner. Let's just see if I ever bring you up here again. Yes, I said, smiling confidently. Let's just see if you do.
So I have some photographs that I'm going to share that were taken at the falls and in the remnants of the locks that were mentioned and of Matildaville. So stay tuned and watch for those. And I hope to see you next time as well. If you would, like, subscribe, and share these videos with those you think would be interested. Thanks again.
These first 2 photos were taken way back in 1975 when I was an Army nurse stationed in Washington, D.C., and my husband and I visited the Great Falls. That's why the pictures are a little bit faded and grainy, but you can still capture the spectacular vista of the falls, the cascading water that truly does sound like thunder as it goes by, surrounded by the woods. The next 3 pictures were taken a little bit more recently, but still some 20 plus years ago. when my granddaughter was little, and that's her looking over at the falls. Hadn't changed much, and nor would they. Just this tremendous, magnificent body of water cascading along down between the states of Virginia and Maryland. And then you can see the sign for where the site of the town of Matildaville was. And as the sign says, the town did not last more than 40 years. It could not survive the closing of the canal. It was built for it. And then the last picture is my granddaughter standing amidst the locks of the canal. I love that the remnants remain. I'm not positive that they're the original walls of the locks, but they have kept some semblance of the historic place. And I hope that you enjoyed these pictures and the stories that they tell.